Release policy at the Friends Committee on National Legislation, and he joins me now live from Washington. Great to have you here with us on Tier 2 World. See, Donald Trump today can say that presidents before me have done the same, so why should I stop?
Well, thank you so much for having me on. This is yet another horrific U.S.-led regime change war in the Middle East, unfolding at a time of incredible pain and suffering by so many. For more than 2 years, we've warned that if we don't truly end the crisis and genocide in Gaza, we're going to continue to see regional escalation. And it's exactly what we're seeing in Iran, Lebanon, and across the Middle East and beyond. Congress, again, recently voted on the War Powers Resolution. The Senate vote and the House vote happened in the past couple days. Those votes were narrowly defeated. We were able to get a bunch of allies, even some Republicans, flipped over and joined the effort. Yes, there's been a major atrophy of congressional war powers over time. But I think it's critical that members of Congress do force these votes and debates early and often to try to reassert their war powers under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, and also the War Powers Act of 1973. This war was not authorized. The failure of these two votes does not mean a statutory or affirmative authorization for the president to conduct this disastrous and immoral war, and this needs to stop immediately.
Right, and Hassan, obviously we are also hearing disturbing reports come out of Iran. For example, the World Health Organization has confirmed that at least 13 hospitals and health facilities were hit during attacks on Iran, and now multiple investigations are being conducted by major media outlets on what happened in Minab in southern Iran, where more than 150 schoolgirls were killed by a missile strike. And according to some of the investigations that are coming to us, it seems it was a deliberate attack launched by the United States. Obviously, the U.S. side has not given any confirmation on that yet, but what do you make of this?
Absolutely horrific civilian harm that we're seeing. And this is just another example of a pattern by the United States and the Israeli government using U.S. weapons to attack civilian infrastructure in the Middle East. We saw that across Gaza. And now we're seeing it, unfortunately, claim the lives of over 100 school children in Iran. Absolutely horrific and needs to be condemned far and wide. I think what you just mentioned, though, is starting to be felt in the halls of Congress as the case for and against the War Powers Resolution. You're starting to see more and more members of Congress, even on the Republican side, become really skeptical in their comments of why the United States is even involved in this in the first place. This was about stopping an imminent attack from the Iranian government, but there's been no evidence that attack was imminent. They're arguing that this was necessary to stop nuclear weapons and missile programs. They're hitting schools and civilian infrastructure. So what is this really doing to stop nuclear weapons? And under the War Powers Resolution, this is exactly why the framers and the founders of our government said we don't want to have a monarch that can just unilaterally decide that America needs to be involved in these foreign conflicts. That's why they set up the process of requiring a statutory authorization or a declaration of war from Congress. And in 1973, lawmakers saw what we were doing in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, and also said, wow, we need to make a change. So they created the War Powers Act of 1973 and instituted these checks and balances and expedited procedures so members could force these votes and debates. So we're not getting involved in these conflicts without a real thoughtful process with the American people being informed of what's happening. And what we're seeing happen is just devastating civilian harm being done with these U.S. and Israeli weapons. Again, needs to stop. There's no justification for this war with Iran. There is no authorization for this war of aggression against Iran, this regime change war. It's illegal under international law. The American people don't want this war. If you look at dozens of polls that have been taken over the past couple weeks, you clearly see that a majority of Americans don't want to see this. We don't want to repeat the mistakes of Iraq and Afghanistan. We know what endless war looks like. We've been involved in, again, regime change wars in these two countries I mentioned and so many others. And we're tired of spending trillions of dollars wasting the lives of United States soldiers. We've already seen half a dozen or so soldiers be killed, more wounded. We've seen over 1,000 people already, civilians die in Iran. And I fear that number is just going to get more and more. Lastly, I'll just say that diplomacy is really the only option here. War is not the answer, and diplomacy is the way we need to address the situation and any disagreements between the United States, Israel, and Iran going forward. We had the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, otherwise known as the JCPOA, or the Iran nuclear deal. That was working. That was constraining Iran's nuclear program and working to de-escalate the situation in the Middle East. And unfortunately, President Trump in 2018 ripped up that agreement. That was working. And we find ourselves here today. So really sad time for the world, for the Middle East, for U.S. citizens that are dealing with our own affordability crisis here at home with energy prices skyrocketing. And that's only going to get worse with this conflict ongoing. What I know is that peace activists across the country will not give up and work to end the crisis in Gaza, end the crisis going on with Iran. And I know that champions on the Hill are prepared and teeing up more votes and more debates to end this reckless, illegal, and immoral war of aggression against Iran.
Hassan, it may be a sad time for Americans, but for Pete Hegseth, the U.S. Defense Secretary, it's a moment of pride. I'm not sure whether or not you listened to his latest press conference. He keeps talking about how great the American military is and how they have enough munition to sustain the war. And this is what I don't get. If you are the biggest military in the world, the strongest military in the world, why do you need to keep talk about its strength?
That's a good question. I did watch some of those remarks, and it's absurd. We, I think, are stronger when we lead with diplomacy. We bring together coalitions of countries that are on board with diplomacy and support arms control agreements, not when we're waging wars of aggression, murdering civilians in elementary schools, and committing the U.S. to really an open-ended conflict that it's really hard to see how this ends and where this goes. What I know for sure is this does not make us stronger. This does not benefit the American people. What this does benefit, though, is Netanyahu's aims of being a regional hegemon across the Middle East and for his empire expansion. And we're seeing him occupy parts of the West Bank. We've seen an occupation for decades. We've seen encroachment into Gaza, into southern Lebanon, into Syria. We've seen strikes into Iran by the Israeli government. So it's really hard to see how this benefits anybody but Netanyahu and his war aims. So this does not make America stronger. This makes America weaker and look terrible. Last thing I'll say on that is it also makes us look like an unreliable partner. The Iranians were in process of having serious negotiations on their nuclear program and a lot of these different issues back in July last year. Then they were attacked. They were in process of having negotiations in this latest round. And it seems like this war had been planned for weeks, if not months ahead of time. So what is America's word really worth right now if we're going to continue to bomb people that we're negotiating with? So I completely agree with the sentiment that this does not make America stronger. In fact, makes us weaker. And the American people, unfortunately, are going to have to pick up the tab. So that's why we're working very hard to pass the Iran War Powers Resolution. Tough loss on the votes, but they were narrow. We got Republicans like Rand Paul, Rep. Massey, Warren Davidson to defect on that vote. And I know a lot of other Republican members are also feeling very skeptical. And as we continue to force votes and debates, I think the pressure in this important election year with the midterms on the horizon is going to be felt, and I think you're going to see more and more members defect over time.
Hassan El-Tayyab, thanks very much for joining us here on TRT World. I really appreciate your taking out the time.
Appreciate you.